Good afternoon. In my presentation, I would like to first explain why we, as non-native speakers of English, often experience problems when we want to establish a clear structure of our papers. Then I will briefly introduce the IMRAD format that you are probably familiar with. I will continue with cohesion and coherence and try to describe how they contribute to the understandability of our papers. And finally, I will speak about abstracts, and I will try to list some practices to avoid and some rules to follow. So, first of all, we can ask, why is structure so important? And we have to realize that communicating ideas from the writer's mind, from the author's mind, to the mind of the reader is not an easy task. And if we select the structure carefully and wisely, it can serve us as a vessel for ideas. It can be a solid frame we can build upon. Also, we have to realize that facing information overload these days, no one wants to read ill-structured papers that do not follow any clear flow of thoughts. So structure is really important. So, and I'm really glad that you asked that question, because what I found out about the Slavic versus Anglo-Saxon style of academic writing is they are really different. What do you think? Which of these schemes depicts the Anglo-Saxon style of writing, or let's say Anglo-American style of writing? Yes, exactly. Why?
Because it's so direct.
Exactly, it's direct. From the problem to the solution. Yes. Okay, and what about the Slavic style? Yes, actually, letter C. Yes, you can see the line is dashed. So the connections between ideas are not clear. And there might be some divergence from the original problem, so to say. The one in the middle should depict the Oriental style that turns around the problem. Well, what I mean by style of academic writing is the style of, is the argumentative style, the way we develop ideas within a paper. So, if we compare the different approaches to academic writing, the Anglo-Saxon style pays great respect to empirical data. The focus is on the text understandability, that a good quality text is easy to follow. The author himself or herself is responsible for the text clarity, and the academic culture in general is low context. Whereas the continental style, which is applicable for Slovak, Czech, German, and so on style, here the respect is to theory, and the texts are often demanding, traditionally. Sometimes it's work like this. The more complicated, the more complex, the better. And the reader is responsible for the text decryption. So if you are unable to follow the text, this is your fault. Whereas in this style, if you are unable to understand the text, perhaps it's not quite clear, and perhaps the author was not able to create a clear structure to follow. And the academic culture is high context. So we can see these styles are quite different. And the task is this. How can we, with our mindset, culture, etc., write successfully in English? So it's possible because we can adopt several survival strategies, so to say. So for example, we should learn from the experts. A really useful and valuable piece of advice I was given was to study not only the contents, but also the form of paper of renowned scientists in in the respective field. So you can select an author or two, renowned English native speakers, and you can study their scientific development. You can study the typical phrases they use. Then you should learn useful sentences, taboo words, and academic word list terms. I don't know if you are familiar with the academic word list. Are you? No, okay. I will speak about it later. You should definitely rigorously follow the academic paper structure. I remember from my English composition classes how I really disliked thesis statements and how I found the structure, the Anglo-American structure of essays limiting because I wanted to freely express myself. So you should definitely go for structure. Establish your purpose. You should compose your thesis statement. Do you know what the thesis statement is?
Main argument?
Exactly, it's the main argument, like a main idea. Theoretically, it should be worded in a sentence or two and included in your introduction. You should write a clear and a specific introduction, complete body paragraphs, use cohesive ties between sentences and paragraphs. I will explain how we can do this in the part about coherence and cohesion. Then, hedged expressions. English likes euphemisms and, well, softening expressions. You may think that in science, you should be rather direct when expressing your ideas. But sometimes, hedged or tentative statements are useful because you don't want to sound dogmatic or you want to stay on a safe side. You want to be open to other interpretation of your research maybe, okay? So, there's an example. Alcohol-related problems are on the rise. A hedged sentence would be, it is believed that alcohol-related problems are on the rise. Here you would probably have to use the data to support your claim. In the second one, it is like a general belief. This is disputable. I would need more explanation, but in general, it's good if you get familiar with hedged expressions. Other hedging expressions might be several verbs such as to indicate, to appear, to seem. Adverbs and adjectives can also be used to underline this. Okay, you should write an explicit conclusion that would mirror the ideas in the introduction, and you should punctuate your sentences correctly. These days, you can use the support of online correcting tools also. I don't know if you're familiar with Grammarly, for example. There are many other correcting tools, or just the regular spell check. Okay, the academic word list is a list of most frequent academic terms. It was compiled by Dr. Coxhead from the University of Wellington and contains 570 terms. They are organized in 10 lists, and these are common core terms, like they are common for most scientific disciplines. I think it would be really good for you if you try this website that can help you to practice them and do it regularly. Like if you do it like for 10 minutes every day, I'm sure you will see rapid improvement in a short time. It's quite intuitive and interactive also. And perhaps the most important point here is to write concisely. What is typical of our style of writing is long sentences. Sometimes the sentences are 5 lines long. Or what do you think is the ideal length of sentences in an academic paper, like in terms of words, like the number of words? 10? Yeah, actually you are in the range. I was told it's like 12 to 15, maximum 17. Okay? However, sometimes you have to consider other aspects of writing rather than the number of words. But this is the theory. Here it is also useful to realize that we do not read papers to assess them, but to learn from them. So you should always focus on your target reader, okay? To stress the understandability of your paper. This is really key thing. So you want to inform, not to impress. You don't have to be verbose to be consistent and to produce valuable results. Okay, so when we speak about structure of academic papers, these two terms are quite important: coherence and cohesion. The first one refers to the logical organization of your thoughts and ideas. So if the text is coherent, is appropriately organized and easy to follow. Coherence relates to the relationships between the words and sentences. Okay, probably there was a technical problem and one of the slides is, okay, doesn't matter. So the IMRAD format. This is the most commonly used format for academic papers and experimental studies. Some sources state that 90% of papers are published in this format. It's similar to a typical essay structure, which is introduction, body, and conclusion. It starts with introduction. That should basically answer the question, what did you decide to do and why? Methods. Sometimes this section is referred to as materials and methods, or methods and materials. How did you do it? Is the center question. Results, what did you find? And discussion. How does it relate to current knowledge? Well, don't you think there is a part missing? A typical part that you normally include in your papers?
Abstract.
Sure, yes, besides the abstract. Conclusion, exactly, conclusion. Okay, this is just a very basic format. Yes, conclusion is normally a part of discussion. We will explain this. IMRAD is not a novelty. It was actually started to be used as a standard format in the 1970s. In 1972, it was approved by the American National Standard Institute as a standard format. Okay. It can be also nicely demonstrated by this picture. So we start broad, okay, and explain the background of the problem, all the aspects, etc. And then we specify our particular research, so methods, results, and then we again apply the results and discuss them. So we can start with title. When trying to form titles, you should answer 3 questions. Does the title clearly indicate what your research is about? Obviously. Is it brief, informative, and attractive? Does it contain relevant keywords the readers are most likely to search for? Okay, this seems easy, but sometimes it's quite difficult to make good titles, especially in terms of the information value. I remember that one of my first papers was named Image of Slovakia Abroad. What's wrong with it?
It's too broad.
It's too broad. Image of Slovakia where? Like which period, you know? Okay, have a look at these titles and tell me which of them would you find acceptable for an academic paper? You mean this one?
No,
Political liberalism. Okay, sounds good, but I think it's too broad. Yes, this is one of the more acceptable ones. I would think this is too broad again. The third one, yes, the third one is perfect, exactly. Because it states the era, the period, it's highly specific, exactly. What about this one? The last one. You think it's too long, yes. It's actually a title of a real paper. And I think sometimes we have to use long titles. I also don't like it, but the name of the material is quite long. Consider ultra-high performance fiber reinforced concrete. So I don't know if we can afford to make it shorter.
Acronym?
Maybe an acronym. Okay, but acronym should be is not always understandable for a broader audience. Yes, this is a problem. How to put? I would think this is acceptable. Would you all agree? Yeah? Okay, so make the titles informative, attractive, and if possible, brief. Also, attractive. I don't know if you have ever read titles with some elements of amusement or fun. Like some authors try to spice up their titles with allusions to pop culture, Shakespeare, or other work of literature. For example, I will give you an example. Okay, children and mini magnets, an almost fatal attraction. It's a play or a pun maybe. Some research has been done on whether they work for the writer. And what was found out was that, yes, they are read more frequently, but they are not cited more frequently. But in fact, they are able to gain some attention. Okay, introduction. This is the first part of the IMRAD structure. I like John Swaley's CARS model, which is creating a research space. So he compared scientists to plants competing for a space in an ecosystem. So you can imagine yourself as an invasive plant trying to survive in a hostile environment. So first of all, you need to establish a territory. So you should make a claim related to why is your area interesting and worthy of research. You should review previous work in the area. Position yourself in relation to previous work. Then you should establish your own niche. So you need to raise a problem that needs an answer, something really specific that you would like to solve. Indicate the gap with the lack of research, and indicate that you are continuing or developing an existing tradition, if you do so. And then you need to occupy your space. So you should present a statement of purpose, provide an outline, specify broader significance of your problem, and you should definitely convince your reader your paper is worthy of research, of reading, and also your research is valuable. So, statement of purpose is really, really important. Okay, you may find this example a bit irrelevant, but I like to use it. because it clearly demonstrates that the central drive, based on several theories of our life, is the search for meaning. Okay? We always ask, consciously or subconsciously, what is this good for? So, I don't know if you are familiar with the story of this man, or maybe his achievements. It's Viktor Frankl. He was an Austrian psychotherapist, and he survived the Auschwitz concentration camp. And what helped him survive, amidst all the terror there, was that he tried to look at all the atrocities as an independent observer, and was thinking, like, I'm going to use this experience in my future work as a psychotherapist in Vienna. And he actually managed to do so, because he became a renowned psychotherapist and the founder of logotherapy. And he claimed that meaning, search for meaning is central to our lives. You are PhD students and you also teach. And I remember I was told by my supervisor when I started to teach, you should always announce what you are going to teach, of course, and what this is good for, how the students should benefit from it. So you should really stress the benefits. Okay, we are still in the introduction part, so you can make it attractive. Here we are sometimes a bit limited by the nature of academic writing, of course, but we can use an interesting statistics, interesting information. For example, you would describe a common misconception about a certain fact or problem, contradiction, quote. So this should be something like a hook that helps you capture the attention of the audience. Common mistakes in the introduction part are the statements are overly general, like bland, too obvious. For example, information overload is a major problem in the world today. It's a bit of a cliché, isn't it? Dictionary introduction, such as definitions. Sometimes you have to start with definitions, but I would say very often people just skip this. Off-topic introductions, they can also occur. An introduction that goes too far because it gives too many details. You definitely shouldn't steal contents from the body of your paper. This is quite common. So, methods, materials and methods section. The purpose of this section is to persuade the audience about the validity and correctness of your methods and materials. I read in one of those books on academic writing that in the past scientists did not specify all the methods. It actually started with Louis Pasteur that developed the germ theory of diseases. And as his critics believes that germs are generated spontaneously and opposed his ideas, he tried to clearly specify all the particular steps of his methodology. So this is the first time a methodology was written as it is normally these days. So methodology can be compared to a cookbook recipe. Like your experiments should be replicable based on them. So you should answer the questions what, how, or it should provide answers to questions what, how, what materials, and possible problems and their solution. This is particularly valuable for your readers. The materials criteria should include, it should support your claims, should be relevant, typical and representative, accurate and up-to-date, and of course, relevant to your claims. Common mistakes, lack of information. This is maybe typical of inexperienced writers. For example, a missing active ingredient. Recently, I've been correcting a paper on fire retardants, and one of the comment of reviewers was related to missing active ingredients. They really ask, but what really caused the reaction? Okay, so this was quite an important thing to specify. Lack of statistical methodology, use of incorrect tense, because past tense should be used here. Some sources say that in the introduction part, you should mostly use present tense, whereas in the materials and methods section, you should use past tense. The results part is the most significant part because this is your own contribution. You should always decide what results to present and in what order, because some are more conclusive or important than others. When presenting your results, you should definitely use visuals, graphs, charts, photos. They should be used in a clever way, as the common mistakes state. One of the most common mistakes is the surplus of data. You shouldn't include all your data there. You should just carefully select the data that confirm what you want to claim. You shouldn't repeat the data in figures, tables, and legends again. And definitely, you should stay organized. You should either organize your information in the way you did in the method section, for example, chronologically, or from the most to the least important. And the final part is the discussion part, where you should discuss and interpret your findings. Well, you should connect to the previous research, restate your main findings again, and set them in the broader context. Imagine we are in the lower part of the IMRAD model here. So, discussion typically includes presentation of background information, which is optional, summary of key results, this is a must, of course, discussion of results, limitations of study, and broader implications. Common mistakes in the discussion section include: you do not restate the results. Of course, the results shouldn't be stated in the same way as you did in the results section. Okay, this would be useless. Length, you should make it concise. Often, the problem is the poor citation quality. Study limitations are not discussed, and the study significance is not stated or overstated. As I mentioned, in our conditions, we typically also separate conclusion. Okay, we use write conclusion as a separate section. Results and discussion can be combined. Why not? And quite often, if it's desirable, you can state a separate literature review. Literature review typically follows the introduction. Okay, so this was the IMRAD format. And you remember I mentioned the difference between cohesion and coherence. Here we are going to focus on cohesion. In the Anglo-Saxon academic style, we've got several strategies, several ways how we can create cohesion of our text. Cohesion basically relates to the fact that we need to provide the reader by the smooth flow of ideas and connections between them, so it's easy for them to follow the text. So again, the main goal here is the understandability. Okay? So, the new or important information in a sentence is in a stressed position of an object. So, as you know, in English, there's the fixed world order. compared to other languages, for example, Slovak. And it goes like this: subject, verb, object. So if you want to present new information, it should be here, in the object position. And this is really important. The reader expects it to be there, okay? And probably a native speaker also. So let's have a look at this example. Introduction of the new assembly line increased manufacturing. So a new piece of information in this sentence would be manufacturing was increased. Whereas in the second one, manufacturing increased after the introduction of the new assembly line. So the main stress is on the assembly line. So cohesion of information is guaranteed by the structure of the sentence too. And you can stress some aspects of your message by the position of the words in a sentence too. So also, the cohesion of information can be guaranteed if the sentence starts with the information from the preceding paragraph and new information is in the stress position. I will demonstrate this by an example later. Main ideas are developed in separate paragraphs. So, an idea per paragraph, this is important. And the paragraphs are linked with orienters, with words that help us to find some orientation. For example, in the following chapter, so this is a good hint for the reader, or in figure 5. So let's have a look at the first paragraph. To increase the number of student applicants, the university recently implemented a new program. Okay? So the stress is on a new program. An important part of this program, so the program was repeated, okay? So there is a clear cohesion created between these two sentences. I will continue. An important part of this program is to first give seminars at top-ranking high schools in the region. So in the region is important here. Increasing the number of local students, okay? Local is related to the region, etc. I believe that clever writers do it without thinking. But if we need to learn this, maybe it's good to focus on it in your papers and try to establish cohesion in this way. So, as I mentioned, there should be one clear idea per paragraph. And what should be typical of paragraphs is unity. So there should be one idea mentioned, one central idea, order. There is a specific order of parts we should follow: topic sentence, supporting sentences, and the concluding sentence. Coherence, okay? Logical flow of ideas. And completeness, this is important. So a topic sentence is a sentence that gives the main focus of the paragraph. It's something like a mini version of your thesis statement, okay, but in a paragraph. It sometimes includes signposting language to link the paragraph to the previous paragraph, as I have already mentioned. Supporting sentences follow the topic sentence and develop it by giving reasons, evidence, or examples, depending on your topic and on the purpose, of course. And the concluding sentence usually comes at the end and explains why the paragraph is important, and it relates it to the main problem of the paper. To give you an idea, I don't know if you can read it, maybe later in your slides. Self-assessment can also develop skills which make a student more attractive to prospective employers. Self-assessment and prospective employers, this is about, okay? Then you will continue with the main body in which the initial assertion is developed and explained. So, Employers value students with skills in self-assessment because these types of skills are relevant to the wide range of employment contexts. They want graduates who can accurately assess their own competencies in performing tasks, etc. So we will provide the reader with some arguments. And the final sentence goes like this. Students who have developed an autonomous approach to learning are well set for lifelong learning, which will continue throughout and beyond their working lives. So this is the restatement of the first sentence, okay? Students who have developed this are well set up for, etc. And the sentence is self-assessment can develop skills that can make them attractive to potential employers, okay? So, it's important to always mirror the thesis statement or the topic sentence in a concluding sentence. Sometimes we have to go for an advanced paragraph structure. So we need to use more supporting sentences than 3 or 4, okay? Of course, the structure serves our needs. We don't serve the structure, so if it's necessary, we should include more of them. Okay, so I have already mentioned some cohesive devices, and I would say perhaps the most powerful device is linking expressions or transition words. Let's have a look at these 2 sentences. The first one puts it like this. It was announced that nurses' working hours would be increased by 25%. Okay? And the second one, even fewer trainee nurses are expected to join the profession. So, can you find any relationship between these 2 sentences? Or think of a word or a phrase that you can insert in the second one to make their relationship more obvious? Therefore. Wonderful. Therefore. Or, I don't know, as a result, maybe. Okay? We've got a variety of expressions, linking words that we can use. Pardon? Consequently. Wonderful also. In the presentation, you can later check this list of transition words. We call them transition words, linking devices, linking words even. And by the way, they are one of the signs of the text quality. Maybe some of you have passed the Cambridge assessment exams, have you? Yeah, okay. So you know that your essays were actually assessed and evaluated based on the use of linking devices. This is one of the criteria applied. Okay, so they can be used to create addition, like to stress addition, and additionally, etc. Comparison. You can exemplify and illustrate your ideas with them. Contrast, etc. Okay. So, what I do, and maybe you can also consider doing, is after you finish the first draft of your paper, you can try to insert some of the linking devices, because you can think of some possible links between the sentences. Here again, this is our service to the potential reader. Okay? We want to make the text more understandable. I've also found perhaps a better example. So it's not here, but I hope it's not important. Smith and al. Report that 70% of the participants experience that daily exercise relieves pain. This is the first sentence. The second one, in Jones et al., 84% of the participants stated that daily exercise relieved pain. So we have the data, but they are not interpreted or explained, okay? So maybe the reader would appreciate a link. For example, Smith and al. Report that 70% of the participants experience that daily exercise relieves pain. Similarly, 84% of the participants in Jones, and so on. Okay? So again, our goal here is understandability of the paper. Okay, and this is the final part, abstract. So abstract is the first part seen and sometimes the only one read. That's why it should be highly polished. It shouldn't contain any typos, spelling mistakes, etc. It should present the purpose of your research, why was it done, what you did, what was done, what was found, and what was concluded. The rules. Include no lines that will again be used in the introduction. This is quite a common practice. The researchers would, because they put them so nicely and they are sure they are correct, so they would repeat them again in the introduction. Avoid minor aspects of your methods. I think this is obvious. Why? Make it highly specific and avoid vague expressions such as, this is also quite typical, especially of Slovak papers. The significance of the results is discussed in chapter 5, for example. Okay? Or some physical properties were studied. This is too general and not specific enough. You should use short sentences. By the way, the longer the sentence, the more likely you are going to make mistake in it. So, if avoidable, do not use abbreviations. If necessary, explain them. And pay particular attention to grammar and spelling. The types of abstracts. Opinions vary, but generally we have structured abstracts that feature subheadings. Okay? So the structure is clear because the subheadings are there. Descriptive, they do not specify results and conclusion, just describe your research. Informative, that give detailed results. Indicative, that introduce your work and findings, typical of conferences. Because once you apply for a conference, maybe your research is not complete yet, okay? It's not finished yet. And then the review article abstracts that normally consist of these parts: purpose, data identification and extraction methods, findings, data synthesis, and conclusions. These days, structured abstracts are the most popular ones. I would like to ask you, what's your experience? Are really structured abstracts the most applied ones or required ones? I don't know about your field, but according to the resources I've studied, it is so. So, the subheadings can vary. They can be different based on the journal or conference, but usually they consist of these parts: purpose and motivation. It should be put like this: a problem is an increasing concern in a field or area. Then the problem is stated itself. The purpose of this research is to investigate this and that. The methods: using a cross-sectional analysis, this study examined results. In abstracts, once again, you should only state the most significant ones. A phenomenon was found to play the leading role in facilitating, etc. And then the conclusions, where you should relate back to the problem and purpose. So this study answers the problem of, further studies are needed to establish, etc. There is a sample abstract. So I'll briefly read it, I hope you don't mind. So the title, the paper title is Exploring Barriers of Enterprise Search Implementation, a Qualitative User Study. So the purpose is given. Despite a growing demand for enterprise search from practice, little is known about its implementation from an academic perspective. This is a good start, I think, because you established background. As the few available practice-oriented investigations show, enterprise search user satisfaction is rather low. The purpose of this paper is therefore to explore user-centric barriers of enterprise search implementation in order to increase user satisfaction. So again, the purpose of this paper is clearly stated. The purpose is to explore the problem. So then design, methodology and approach are specified. Results are built on a qualitative user study in an R&D organization. Findings are gained from think-aloud observations introduced by semi-structured interviews in which 10 knowledge workers explore a newly implemented enterprise search tool. Okay, so we know that this is a qualitative user study and they applied semi-structured interviews. And also they specified the number of participants. Findings illustrate barriers that knowledge workers have to overcome when adopting enterprise search to find project-relevant documents. Implementation barriers relate to selection for keywords, search query formulation, availability and adequacy of metadata, relevance judging of search results, current search strategies, and overall perception of enterprise search usefulness. Okay. This is the second part of it. Research limitations and implications are specified. So, limitations address the piloted enterprise search software, along with its specific configuration and scope, the chosen research approach of generating qualitative findings from a single case, and the size of the involved sample of engineers. Implications address measures to increase enterprise search adoption. Practical implications. This study provides project manager with knowledge to take appropriate actions in the early phases of enterprise search implementation, and even prior to that, to raise the success of enterprise search projects. It contributes to a better understanding of enterprise search engine, user needs, and assists in concretizing user requirements. I guess you would have to read it over a couple of times to have the full grasp of it, but I like its structure. I think it's really well structured. And the final part stresses the originality and the value. While existing studies primarily focus on advancing the technical perspective of search in organizations, the author elaborates on the under-investigated social and organizational aspects. The author furthermore stressed the importance of user-centered approaches for enterprise search adoption. Okay, so this is the original value, that despite the existing studies with different focus, this particular author elaborates on the under-investigated aspects. Okay, so, of course, we can make mistakes that are related to structure, but also there are some typical mistakes concerning grammar, syntax, etc. Czech researcher Lenka Môcová did quite a comprehensive analysis of typical mistakes found in bachelor theses, diploma theses, and PhD theses of Czech students that I think are really typical of Slovak students as well. So, most mistakes were related to word order. And typical sentence was like this. To achieve the defined task was used an anonymous questionnaire. So you see that we've got the fixed word order in an English sentence, whereas this one put it incorrectly. So the correct sentence might be like this. To achieve the defined task, an anonymous questionnaire was used. So always double check the word order in your sentences. Then the use of pronouns. after collecting enough responses, I will evaluate the results separately, which is supposed to be wrong. And the correct version, after collecting enough responses, the results will be evaluated separately. Well, in our conditions, this is not recommended. It is not recommended to use first person singular. Not even some journals wouldn't like if you use we, so the first person plural.
I think it's here because after collecting, then I will evaluate is the wrong one.
Sure.
Not the I
Yeah.
After collecting, then the result will be evaluated.
Sure, but also she wrote about this practice in general in the analysis that we shouldn't use I, for example. I don't know. I would say the trend goes towards personal, like expression. I don't know. What do you think?
I mean, English people like the I, the direct, it's much more clear. I mean, I think that in Italy and other culture we use the passive, so for them it's very complicated, something that, but again, it depends on the...
May I comment also on this? What I observed is also that there is not a systematic use of scientific bibliographic references. So very often in scientific articles there are references about media articles. It can also be, especially in the technological domain, why not? And then articles on specialized magazines, also written by scientists. But in specialized magazines you are more allowed to use informal tone. So you can say, I did this with my group, we purchased this machine and we run this test. So I think in that context is okay. Also in the media, it depends on the journalistic style, of course. I think it's the use in the journal article, why to use just the URL of an article and not a paper published in the proceedings. And I observed this in the last 2 years since I'm here. It is not really clear what kind of source to use.
Yeah.
I think it's beyond your presentation, and we will talk in the next days about this.
Yeah. So the third common problem was the articles, and especially in terms of countable versus uncountable nouns. For example, the goal of my bachelor paper is to provide as specific information, which is wrong, because the goal of my bachelor paper is to provide specific information is a better version of it. Then the incorrect use of there is there are is commonly a problem. In this thesis, there are mentioned calculations, etc. In this thesis, calculations are mentioned. Calculations related to this and that are mentioned. Perhaps would be a slightly better version. I would say this is really typical of Slovaks. I could see it in many abstracts, really. There are mentioned. There is described the problem of. Anything you can think of, but there is and the verb form. Prepositions. You should always double check whether a specific preposition is suitable with the noun or a verb you would like to use it with. So, a possible inspiration in their work seems to be wrong because possible inspiration for their work. Other typical mistakes include need of, need for, okay, often found in titles, etc. I'm sure you're familiar with the Google search, and that if you search a specific term in quotation marks, you can check whether this is really used in the way, and etc. Okay. Okay, and then misspellings are also common. Okay. So, when we want to structure our presentation in a really solid quality way, we need careful preparation. You can either use paper and pen and try to sketch it. Like, you can use subheadings, and then you can just use the main ideas. In this way, you will be obliged to follow the structure you created, okay? Or you can use word processor, or there are several online applications that facilitate structuring academic papers. This is particularly a good one. It's called Ginkgo app. It's easy to follow, intuitive. I would advise you to download and try it. There is a free version, I believe, the basic one. Okay. And that's it. Thank you for your attention. I don't know if you would like to ask something, or perhaps...
Yes, let's open a discussion. Other questions, and can be related to the talk, or also maybe in general, also to connect it to the previous talks.
If you don't mind me asking, can I ask how many of you actually wrote an abstract so far? And draft our first article? So I think the important lesson for you is here, be happy if you make those mistakes in spelling. By then you're already accepted, so you're fine. Don't worry too much maybe at this stage of this detail. What I would, from my own experience, really say, when you want to start writing an article, the first thing that you do, get 9 papers minimum from that same journal where you want to publish it, or on the same topic, read their 9 abstracts and then write yours. Abstracts you'll write at the end anyway, so start with the introduction. Read 9 or 10 papers on your topic from different journals. Read their introductions and then start writing yours. Don't reinvent the wheel. I mean, we've been doing scientific publishing for 300, 400 years. People have been writing forever. You'll find millions of examples of how these papers look like. So just read a few and then write yours and then correct them. That would make an easy step. I know we talked a lot today about many, many small things, but in the end, if only 3 people have ever written an abstract, go back to the first basic step, and that is take an example that exists and use that as a first step to do so.
Thank you. Yes, yeah, it should be stressed here. In our classes, actually courses that are actually 1 semester or 2 semester long, we study sample abstracts a lot and try to analyze them, but this would require more space and time, yes. Thank you.
I have also a question on the papers that are more conceptual, because usually the methodology, the data, so in this case, what happens when there is no data and you just try to, I don't know, integrate some existing models or try to provide a different angle to something just with the arguments not supported by data?
You mean that quite often people do not specify the data, they just state the arguments, but they do not support them by data?
Well, it can be indirect data, for instance, papers on the information society theories with statistics about what is an information society connected to knowledge services. There can be statistics about categories of workers on different parts and shifting from rural to industrial to information jobs. These kind of statistics, yes, but not directly collected by the author of the paper. So used only kind of to support the argument. But you might say, okay, I have a different model for the information society, and this is based on these topics. And then you just support with indirect data, not with something that you collect. So is this still fitting into the kind of IMRAD model, or are there some other models that are more suitable to conceptual papers?
I mean, I don't know the answer to this. Someone has written a paper like this before. It would be a miracle if you were the first one who's written such a paper. There's theoretical physics, there's philosophy, There's, arts and humanities that have nothing what we call about actual data. They've written millions of papers. Go out there, find one, and then use the same sentence. They do have structures, and there's something that I'll talk about tomorrow, though, it's called reporting guidelines. So many fields around there have papers that tell you exactly how the paper should look like, with details, not just the IMRAD structure, but a list of 36 items that you need to include in each individual sections that you're writing. But that really is very discipline specific. But for sure, your mentor did not tell you to write a paper that no one ever has done on, a structure that does not exist. So just look up in the literature and use their example. In the end, you need to choose a venue where you're going to publish this. So that journal will have those papers published. The worst thing as an editor or a peer reviewer is if you get a paper to review and they have no clue how the journals in your how the papers in your journal look like. If you open Nature, and I don't know if any of you have done one of those most prestigious journals, they completely do not follow the IMRAD structure. They don't do that. They publish the IMRAD structure in the appendix. All their article is half a page of a text, something that you'll find in a journal, where it starts with, we found this. There's no methods, there's nothing about that, there's only what they found. Because they chose as a journal that they want to disseminate in this way. So if you submit a paper that looks completely different, the editor immediately knows you have been so lazy that you have not even bothered to look how one paper in this journal looks like. And then you shouldn't wonder why they rejected you outright.
I would say that IMRAD provides a clear structure, like especially for inexperienced readers.
No, of course, it's the best thing, and I highly recommend it. But I'm just saying, if you don't know how the paper looks like in a journal, don't expect praise from people who send it. Okay.
So let's hear from some PhD students. Has anyone, for instance, followed the academic writing courses here? And that's something that our team wonders, because there are experts here that can support PhD students with their writing, with the communication skills, and with all the development, especially in the first stage of their work. But then, is it about authoring a PhD in Slovak that basically neglects all the utility of these services, or is there something else? Maybe I would really like to hear from the PhD students, especially from Žilina, to better understand where is the gap, or how can we best profit from people like Lenka and others, or to learn from the community of the few, but still valuable international researchers here, do some kind of internal peer review also, learning from each other. Yes, anyone raising hands?
I can recognize a couple of faces, like students who participated in the classes. The fact is that we would definitely appreciate more cooperation with you. I think this would be great. We basically provide like a language input. Okay, not all of us are skilled researchers, so to say. But what we can do is actually try to correct the way they write. So, yeah.
So probably, I think that's what I interpret. What is missing is the strong collaboration with supervisors, because the supervisors are also the ones providing guidance in a specific topic, but then they are not responsible for all the academic writing, style, clarity. This is left a little bit like independent self-learning by the PhD candidate in a way.
I mean, in a sense, the supervisor can also check the structure in English, because they should be familiar with the journal. They are submitting the papers, or some help the PhD students should also receive from the supervisor. Something that came to my mind, because we discussed a lot of it about we are not native languages, etc. So I don't know if you do that, but I remember I did when I was much younger. I was like, sketch the things in Italian and then try to translate. Don't do that, because the way the paper is written is completely different. It's much shorter, at least than Italian. You see the spiral, you present it like, that's Italian. We use like a 300 pages to explain something that in English is explained in 1 page. So we just talk. So translating from Italian to English is an impossible task. It's much easier if you start like thinking in English and write in English, even if you make mistakes, but at least you start in the right way. So that was my experience. Maybe it doesn't apply to you guys, but I mean, if it's happened, try to force yourself to immediately write in English, and yeah, that's about it.
Thank you.
I also feel that it's good if the general level of general English level of students is on like sufficient degree, at least B2 plus, because if not, they just fail to understand the papers in English. So maybe also like general language input in terms of PhD students can be supported.
I will come to this side with accessibility.
Just advice about the study in the writing, because we say to not to be too verbose, but I'm thinking about how to balance with not too informal but not too verbose. Just some advices about.
Can you repeat it, please?
About the style of the people of the writing, how to balance the style, not being too verbose, but at the same time not being too informal.
Well, you have to learn taboo words in terms of that level of formality. You have to learn taboo words that you shouldn't use, which is slang and colloquial English terms, and typical sentences to be used in academic language. There is a wonderful series, Academic Vocabulary in Use, by the Cambridge University Press. Really well-processed units that can provide with a lot of language input. You can practice typical phrases. Like, these are the common core academic language phrases, okay? Some survival academic language, I would say. So this is all about, I think, inspiration from the others, from the fellow scientists in the field. So I think I like that idea about studying the sample papers a lot, because I think this is the best way how to learn. And concerning the verbosity, you should try to use a certain format and try to stick to it. When I correct the sentences, I sometimes have to divide them and then perhaps connect them, or let's create the connection with those linking devices, but they still remain separate sentences. Like, if you set yourself a limit, like your sentences shouldn't exceed certain number of words, you know, then this can be a good orientation point for you. I think being a good academic writer is quite a demanding task and requires a lot of practice, really. But I would say you should start with academic word list and with academic vocabulary input, definitely.
I'd like to tell you an experience I had. When I discovered this inwrites, of course it depends on the journals, but you know, more or less the structure is, especially many scientific journals, they use this structure. But in transport, it's very rare to have a section with discussion. We have the models, and when we discuss the model, it's already the discussion. And then I remember I followed one of these courses, and the guy was a little bit, it was a very good guy, but a little bit strict. So it's like, this is the inwrite, and you must have a discussion. It's like, we're transported, no, you must. Okay. Next paper I wrote a section with discussion, and then the reviewer said, we don't need the discussion. We're like, oh gosh. So, and it really depends. Of course, if the paper is a good paper, again, it's not rejected because of that. But to give an idea that you can have different evaluation. So I mean, the structure more or less is that one. You might change it for the structure in the journals, etc. But of course, then it depends on you know, the reviewer you get and what the opinion is. So, but I decided, well, I'll follow the guy. Yeah, maybe he's right. And then it was like, no way. But not all the reviewers are so strict, and not all, so be aware. As long as the content is there and is written clearly, that's the most important thing. But definitely, as he was mentioning, and that I also quoted a paper in psychology, for example, which are completely different from economics. So you try to follow the rules, because there are some rules and the reviewers who do not found himself or herself in the structure. So check that the journal you are sending the paper to really doesn't have a clear structure that is different from what you are used to. And that's definitely a good advice.
And also, I mean, be smart. You know that with the range of you here, some of you have most likely been unlikely with the mentor that you got. Not all mentors are brilliant. And maybe they have not given you a paper to base your first draft of a paper on. But then you be smarter than them. Take the last paper that they have published and use your structure according to them. It's very unlikely they will criticize you very much for the last paper that they've done and that holds the same structure. You know, think about, you know, these are people who are doing this everyday work, and if they haven't given you their work to see what they've done, then you find it using methods that are hopefully learned by now in literature search, and then look how they've done it. You know, you really do always start with a paper that someone else has written, and most of you will have to read hundreds of papers before you even start writing something. Some of those papers you will really like, mark them somewhere and use them as an example of this is how I want my first paper to look like, and then it goes much easier after that.
But be careful which paper you read, because sometimes my students read paper and say, no, this is not the one. It's a problem. So please go to the supervisor, and unless you really take the paper from Nature or some good journals, you are sure it's good journal. Be careful, because you might follow the wrong one. So I mean, I found myself like, no, tell me which paper are you reading, because it might be even worse. So yes, you're right.
I'd like to comment on the structure, actually, that we were talking about, and mainly from a little Slovak perspective, because our other speakers are foreigners, and in Slovakia, the structure that they mentioned today is not really the one that we were taught at school, I think. I was very lucky because I studied at a French school, and we were exactly taught this kind of structure in everything, using that in everything. Whatever we were writing, we were always using this kind of structure, this introduction, then, okay, we call it in paper, we call it methods, discussion at the end, or conclusion, however, but you still start with the state of art, with you go into the detail, and then you end up with a conclusion. We don't use it in the Slovak subjects usually, where we were never taught that, basically. This is very important. Whatever you will think about, and you can use the same in writing proposals. It's exactly the same. You start with the introduction, which is like a broad area. You go deeper inside what you are focusing on, what you want to do, and you conclude at the end. So once you understand how this is working, this coherence that the other speaker mentioned today, the coherence of all these paragraphs that you have to follow the structure, then you're in and you can write whatever you want about, actually. It might be a proposal, it might be a paper, might be everything. In Slovak subjects, we were usually like, you know, this kind of, okay, and I was thinking about this, and then we slowly go to another subject, and another one, and then we conclude with beautiful weather at the end, like whatever, really. But this is really structure. You have to follow, and you have to be strict in this, and that it makes sense, and it's very easy. Once you understand, it will be very clear and easy for you.
Any other comments? So if not, we take again Lenka and all the speakers.